August 15, 1945. A sighting near Mexia, Texas. The air inside the cattle car is a foul, living thing. It is a suffocating blanket woven from sweat, coal smoke, and the metallic tang of fear. For 3 days, since they were herded off the ship in Galveston, this has been their world. The rhythmic, brutal clatter of steel on steel, the lurching stops and starts, the slivers of an alien landscape glimpsed through the slats. It is a landscape of blinding sun and endless, flat earth, the color of rust. Nothing like the deep greens of the Rhineland or the cool shadows of the Bavarian forests they left behind in a different lifetime. Inside, 24 women of the former German Wehrmacht auxiliaries, nurses, signals operators, administrative staff, huddle together on the rough wooden floor. Their field gray uniforms are stained and torn, their faces smudged with soot and grime. Around each pair of wrists is a light chain, connecting them to their neighbor. The chains are a constant, chafing reminder of their status. Not soldiers, not even prisoners of war with rights, just cargo. Anneliese Schmidt, formerly a 20-year-old Luftwaffenhelferin from Cologne, presses her forehead against the rough planks. The wood is hot to the touch. Her city is gone. Her family, she prays, is alive somewhere in the rubble. She closes her eyes and tries to summon the memory of rain on cobblestones, but all she can feel is the oppressive, humid heat that seeps through the walls of the train car, a heat that feels like it's trying to cook the very air from her lungs. "They're stopping," Ingrid, a cynical radio operator from Berlin chained to her left, murmurs. Her voice is a dry rasp. The screech of brakes confirms it, a long, agonizing shriek of metal that sends a final, violent shudder through the car. Then silence, a heavy, expectant silence, broken only by the buzz of insects outside, a sound as foreign and menacing as the landscape itself. The women look at one another, eyes wide in the gloom. This is it, the final destination. Heavy footsteps crunch on gravel outside. Voices, loud and sharp, bark in English, a language that sounds to them like angry stones clattering in a can. Anneliese feels a tremor run through Ingrid's arm, a tremor that travels down the chain to her own wrist. A bolt is thrown, a deafening clang that makes them all flinch. Light, impossibly bright, floods the car as the heavy door is hauled aside. It is a physical assault, forcing them to shield their eyes. Silhouetted against the glare stand the figures of their new captors, American soldiers. But they are different from the ones in France. They seem taller, leaner. Their khaki uniforms are crisp, but they wear them with a lazy, almost arrogant looseness. On their heads are not helmets, but wide-brimmed hats that cast deep shadows over their faces. They move with a slow, deliberate confidence, as if they own the very ground they stand on. "All right, out, rouse, let's go, ladies," a voice bellows, thick with an accent they've never heard before. The women stumble to their feet, clumsy and stiff, their chains rattling like a ghostly percussion. They are herded down a makeshift ramp and onto the parched Texas earth. The heat hits Anneliese like a physical blow, stealing her breath. The sun is a white-hot hammer in a bleached blue sky. Dust, fine as flour, immediately coats her worn boots and rises in a choking cloud. They are lined up in 2 ragged columns. All around them is a vast, empty expanse, shimmering in the heat. In the distance, a line of single-story wooden buildings sits behind a formidable fence of barbed wire, its strands glinting menacingly. This is Camp Mexia, their new home, their prison. Anneliese scans the faces of the American guards. They are young, some no older than she is. They chew gum, their jaws working methodically. Their eyes, however, are hard. They look at the German women not with hatred, but with a kind of detached, weary contempt, as if they are looking at livestock. "The werden wie Tiere behandelt," Ingrid whispered beside her, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "We are treated like animals." The sentiment ripples down the line in hushed, bitter murmurs. They are chained, filthy, exhausted, and now they are being stared at like creatures in a zoo. A portly American captain with a clipboard, a man named Wallace, walks down the line, counting them off. He stops, his gaze lingering on the chains. He says something to a sergeant standing nearby, a tall, weathered man with calm, steady eyes. The sergeant just nods, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Anneliese feels a surge of pure terror. She has heard stories whispered in the transit camps in Europe, about what the Americans did to prisoners, especially women. The chains suddenly feel tighter, a cold iron promise of what is to come. The heat, the dust, the barbed wire, the cold eyes of the guards, it all merges into a single, overwhelming wave of despair. They have been stripped of their country, their freedom, their names. And now, standing in the merciless Texas sun, they feel they are about to be stripped of their last shred of humanity. The air hangs thick and still, disturbed only by the lazy circling of a vulture high in the white sky.
Captain Wallace moves with the impatient energy of a man who wants a tedious job finished. He barks orders, and a small folding table is set up in the meager shade of the train car. One by one, the pairs of chained women are shoved forward. A corporal with a bored expression takes down their names, mangling the German pronunciation, before assigning them a number. Anneliese Schmidt becomes 317. Ingrid becomes 318. They are no longer women from Cologne and Berlin. They are numbers in a ledger, assets to be managed. Sergeant Frank Miller watches the process from a short distance, leaning against the fender of a dusty army truck. He was born and raised less than 100 miles from here, in Waco. He knows this heat, this dust, this sky. He also knows the look he sees in the prisoner's eyes. It's the same look he saw on the faces of shell-shocked GIs in the Hurtgen forest and on the skeletal civilians they liberated from work camps near Leipzig. It is the look of people who have fallen off the edge of the world. He is not a man given to sentimentality. War has burned that out of him. But he is a man with a deeply ingrained, almost unconscious sense of propriety. There is a right way to do things, and a wrong way. And this, he feels, is the wrong way. The chains clink and rattle with every movement, a sound of degradation that seems to set his teeth on edge. He pushes himself off the truck and ambles over to Captain Wallace, who is sweating profusely, dabbing at his thick neck with a handkerchief. "Captain," Miller says, his voice a low Texas drawl. "What is it, Sergeant?" Wallace replies without looking at him, his focus on the line of women. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Wallace finally turns, annoyed. "Go on." "The chains, sir. They made sense on the boat, on the train. Out here, inside the wire, they seem a bit much." Wallace's eyes narrow. "A bit much? Sergeant, these are the enemy. They were part of the machine that killed thousands of our boys. I'm not about to take chances because they're wearing skirts." "With all due respect, sir," Miller continues, his tone even. "They're auxiliaries and nurses. They're exhausted, half-starved, and scared spitless. They're not going anywhere. The chains, it's just not a good look. It's not how we do things. How we do things, Sergeant, is dictated by regulations. U.S. Army POW Regulation 38510. Security is paramount. They remain restrained until they are processed and secured in the barracks. End of discussion." Wallace turns his back, a clear dismissal. Miller stands there for a moment, the dust swirling around his boots. He looks at the women. Anneliese is next in line. He sees her flinch as the corporal shouts at her for being too slow. He sees the raw, red welts on her wrists where the iron has rubbed her skin raw during the long journey. He sees Ingrid staring defiantly at the ground, a mask of hard pride failing to conceal her terror. He thinks of his father's ranch. He's seen scared cattle in a chute, their eyes wide with panic. It's the same look. The captain's words echo in his mind. They're the enemy. He knows that. He fought them. He saw what they were capable of. But these aren't SS guards from Dachau or fanatics from the Hitler Youth. They are defeated, broken women. And the sound of those chains is an offense to the quiet, flat landscape and the vast, impartial sky. It is a sound that does not belong here. He turns and walks away from the processing table, his movements unhurried. Captain Wallace likely thinks he's returning to his post, defeated. But Miller doesn't head back to the truck. He walks past it, his long strides eating up the dusty ground, heading towards a small tool shed that stands near the camp's motor pool. His face is set, the lines around his eyes hardened by a quiet, unshakable resolve. He disappears inside the shadowy interior of the shed. Back in the processing line, Anneliese watches him go. She saw the exchange with the captain. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the tension, the angry dismissal. She saw the tall sergeant look at her wrists. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something other than contempt in his eyes, but she dismissed it as a trick of the heat, a fantasy born of desperation. The American officer had won the argument. Nothing would change. They would be herded into their new prison, still chained together like beasts for slaughter. The hope she hadn't even realized she was holding, a tiny, fragile ember, dies in her chest, leaving nothing but cold ash.
A minute passes, then another. The heat is relentless, baking the very air. The processing continues its humiliating rhythm. A name called, a number assigned, a shove forward. The German women have fallen into a state of numb compliance, their spirits worn down to a fine powder by exhaustion and dread. Anneliese has just given her name, flinching as the corporal butchers it into something unrecognizable. She and Ingrid are now waiting to be directed towards the barracks, their chain pulling taut between them. Then he reappears. Sergeant Miller emerges from the tool shed, walking back towards them. The sun glints off the object in his right hand. It's a pair of bolt cutters, long-handled and heavy, the kind used for cutting through thick wire and locks. He carries them not as a weapon, but as a tool. A ripple of fear, electric and immediate, shoots through the line of women. They shrink back. A tool like that can be used for many things. They imagine a blow, a brutal enforcement of discipline. Ingrid lets out a small involuntary gasp and pulls on the chain, trying to put more distance between herself and the approaching American. Annalise stands frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This is it. The casual cruelty she had feared is about to become real. Captain Wallace, busy with his clipboard, doesn't notice Miller's approach until he is almost upon the line. The other guards, the Texas boys in their wide-brimmed hats, stop their lazy chewing and watch, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Miller doesn't say a word. He doesn't look at the captain or the other guards. He walks directly to the first pair of women in the line, a pale nurse from Hamburg at her partner. They cringe, shielding their faces. Annalise watches, holding her breath. Instead of raising the cutters to strike, Miller kneels slightly. He calmly takes the length of chain between the two women's wrists in his gloved left hand, pulling it taut. With his right, he positions the powerful jaws of the bolt cutters over a link. The women stare, mesmerized by the quiet, deliberate movements. There is a soft grunt of exertion from the sergeant. Then a single, sharp sound that cuts through the oppressive silence. Snap! The sound is shockingly loud. It is the sound of finality, the sound of severed steel. The link breaks, and the two halves of the chain fall away, clattering into the thick dust. The nurse stares at her freed wrist, then at her partner's. She looks up at Sergeant Miller, her mouth half open in disbelief. He gives her a single, curt nod, as if he were merely fixing a piece of fence. Then he stands and moves to the next pair. He works his way down the line with an unhurried, methodical pace. Snap, snap, snap. With each metallic clack, another link is broken, another pair of women freed. A wave of stunned silence washes over the prisoners. This is not happening. It cannot be happening. This is not brutality. It is the opposite, an act so unexpected, so contrary to their entire experience of the last several months, that their minds struggle to comprehend it. Tears begin to well in the eyes of the women he has passed. Not tears of sorrow, but of profound, earth-shattering shock. One woman, a stout cook from Munich, begins to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking. Now he is standing in front of Annalise and Ingrid. Annalise can see him clearly, the sun-crinkled corners of his eyes, the fine layer of dust on his uniform, the calloused strength in his hands as he takes their chain. She braces herself, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. He doesn't look at her face. He focuses only on the task. He positions the cutters. She feels the slight vibration through the metal as the jaws close. Snap. The weight is gone. The constant chafing pressure on her wrist vanishes. A sudden, dizzying lightness rushes through her arm. She lifts her hand, turning it over, staring at the raw red skin as if it belongs to someone else. It is free. It is at that exact moment that Captain Wallace finally realizes what is happening. His face, already red from the sun, turns a deep, apoplectic purple. "Sergeant," he roars, his voice cracking with fury. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Miller slowly straightens up, the bolt cutters held loosely in his hand. He turns to face his commanding officer. He is surrounded by women who are no longer linked, standing as individuals for the first time in days, all of them staring at him. He has cut about half the chains. The air crackles with tension, a standoff between the by-the-book officer and the quiet Texan who has just committed an act of brazen, inexplicable insubordination.
The two men face each other in the suffocating heat, an island of authority in a sea of silent, watching prisoners. The other guards have straightened up, their lazy posture gone, sensing a real confrontation. For a long moment, the only sound is the buzzing of flies and the distant hum of a generator. Captain Wallace takes a step forward, his fists clenched. "I gave you a direct order, Sergeant Miller. Those prisoners were to remain restrained." Frank Miller does not raise his voice. He does not flinch. He meets the captain's enraged gaze with a look of unnerving calm. "They're inside a secure, fenced-in facility, sir. They've been processed. According to the Geneva Convention, prisoners are to be treated humanely. The transport chains are no longer necessary for security. They are an encumbrance." He delivered the lines like a statement of fact, not an excuse. It is a calculated risk. By invoking the Geneva Convention, he is shifting the argument from one of simple disobedience to one of military and international law. Wallace sputters, momentarily caught off guard. He knows Miller is technically correct, but the sergeant's defiance is galling. "I am the commanding officer of this processing detail," Wallace bellows. "I decide what is necessary for security." "Yes, sir," Miller says quietly. Then he gestures with the bolt cutters towards the remaining chained women. "Then I request your permission to finish the job." It is a masterful move. Wallace is trapped. He can reassert his authority by punishing Miller and ordering the chains to be put back on, an act that would be both cruel and absurd in front of his own men and the now compliant prisoners. Or he can back down, his authority publicly challenged. He looks at the faces of the other GIs. He sees no support for his position, only a grudging respect for the sergeant. He looks at the German women. They are not rioting or trying to escape. They are standing perfectly still, watching, their fear now replaced by a fragile, bewildered hope. With a sound of pure disgust, Wallace throws his hands up. "Fine, get it done. Then get them to their barracks. I'm holding you personally responsible for every last one of them, Miller." He turns on his heel and storms off towards the administrative buildings, his rage radiating off him in palpable waves. Miller watches him go, his expression unchanging. Then he turns back to the women. He walks to the next pair in line and, with the same methodical precision, continues his work. Snap, snap, snap. The sound rings out, a steady, rhythmic declaration of principle. When he reaches the last pair, he cuts the final chain and lets the heavy bolt cutters fall to his side. He looks at the women, all of them now standing free, and gives a single nod to the other guards. "All right, let's get 'em moved." The journey to the barracks is different. The women walk not as a shuffling, clanking unit, but as individuals. The change is more than physical. A flicker of dignity has been returned. They are still prisoners, but the feeling of being cattle has receded, replaced by a profound and unsettling confusion. The barracks are simple wooden structures, long and low under the Texas sun. Inside, it is stiflingly hot, but clean. Rows of cots with thin mattresses line the walls. At the end of the room are wash basins with running water. For Annalise, the sight of a bar of coarse lye soap is a miracle. She goes to a basin, turns the tap, and plunges her hands into the cool water. She scrubs at the grime of the journey, watching it swirl away. She washes her face, her neck, the raw skin of her wrists. She looks up and catches her reflection in a small, warped mirror tacked to the wall. A stranger looks back at her, a thin, haunted girl with hollows under her eyes. But she is clean, and she is free of her chains. Later, as the sun sets, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, the women are given their first meal, a stew of beans and meat, and a piece of cornbread. It is bland, unfamiliar, but it is hot and filling. They eat in silence, the clink of their spoons on the metal trays the only sound. Annalise sits on her cot next to Ingrid. "Why did he do it?" Annalise asks in a low voice, almost to herself. Ingrid, who has regained some of her cynical composure, shrugs. Perhaps he is a kind man, or perhaps he wanted to defy his officer. With Americans, who can tell? It changes nothing. Look, she gestures to the window. Outside, the barbed wire fence is a black web against the dying light. Those are the only chains that matter. Annalise looks out at the fence line, stretching into the dusky infinity of the Texas prairies. Ingrid is right. The physical chains were merely a symptom of their true condition. Freedom from them was a brief, shocking respite, a momentary act of grace in a world that had none. But that act has planted a seed of doubt. The Americans were supposed to be brutal, godless barbarians, according to the propaganda that had been their daily diet for years. Yet the most humane thing that had happened to her in months had just been done by one of them, a tall, quiet cowboy soldier who broke the rules to give them back a piece of themselves. The relief she feels is now mingled with a new, more profound despair, the despair of utter uncertainty, in a land where even an enemy could show you a kindness you no longer believed existed.
The days at Camp Mexia bleed into one another, marked by the rising and setting of the relentless Texas sun. The initial shock of arrival gives way to the soul-crushing monotony of captivity. The women are assigned work details, a jarring departure from their previous lives. Annalise, who once plotted aircraft movements on a map in a bustling command center near Cologne,
now finds herself in a vast cotton field under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Her fingers, once nimble on charts and calipers, become raw and bloodied from pulling the stubborn white bulls from their thorny casings. It is grueling, humbling work. The act on that first day is never spoken of again by the American staff. Captain Wallace keeps his distance, his interactions with Sergeant Miller clipped and formal. But the event has left an invisible mark on the camp's atmosphere. The guards, most of them young men from the surrounding towns, treat the German women with a gruff, professional distance rather than open hostility. The cowboy demeanor that had seemed so menacing at first is revealed to be a kind of laconic practicality. They are there to do a job, and Sergeant Miller's actions have subtly redefined the terms of that job. Humanity, it seems, is now part of the protocol. Annalise sometimes sees him, Sergeant Miller, supervising a work detail or driving a truck along the camp's perimeter road. He never seeks them out. He never speaks to them beyond what is necessary. But when his gaze occasionally passes over them, there is a quiet acknowledgement in it, a silent understanding of the line he crossed for them. For the women, he becomes a symbol, not of America, not of a friendly enemy, but of the unpredictable nature of human decency. His one act serves as a bulwark against their complete descent into cynicism and despair. It is a reminder that the world is not entirely composed of the rigid, brutal logic of war. Letters begin to arrive, trickling in from the ruins of Germany. They are windows into an apocalypse. Ingrid receives a letter from an aunt in Berlin. Her entire family, her parents, her 2 brothers, were killed in the final desperate street fighting. She reads the letter, her face impassive, then carefully folds it and puts it away. That night, Annalise hears her crying softly in her cot, a sound of grief so profound it seems to have no end. Annalise's own letter arrives a week later. It is from her father. Their home is a pile of bricks. Her mother is alive, but frail. They are living in the basement of a bombed-out church, surviving on rations from the British. He writes not of blame or hatred for the Allies, only of a bone-deep weariness, of the struggle to find bread, to stay warm, to believe in a future. The news is both a relief and a burden. Her family is alive, but their world is gone. She is a prisoner thousands of miles away, utterly powerless to help them. The barbed wire fence seems to grow taller, its barbs sharper. One sweltering afternoon in early September, news filters through the camp. Another bomb, more powerful than anyone could imagine, has been dropped on Japan. Then another. The war in the Pacific is over. The world is officially at peace. A strange, conflicted mood settles over the prisoners. The war that took everything from them is finally finished, but their own sentences continue indefinitely. The hope for repatriation burns brighter, but it is a painful, impatient fire. Months crawl by. The fierce heat of summer gives way to a mild, pleasant autumn. The women's German uniforms have been replaced by simple denim work clothes. They have learned a few words of English. A few of the guards have learned a few words of German. Small, cautious interactions take place across the divide. A shared cigarette, a bar of chocolate traded for a mended shirt. These are not friendships, but they are cracks in the wall of enmity. Then, one morning in the spring of 1946, the order comes. They are going home. The process is the reverse of their arrival. The same numbers, the same lines, the same feeling of being processed by an enormous, impersonal machine. But this time there is no fear. There are no chains. They are marched to the same dusty railroad siding where their journey began. As Annalise waits to board the train that will take her to a port city and a ship bound for Europe, she scans the handful of American soldiers overseeing the departure. And she sees him. Sergeant Frank Miller is standing near the gate, leaning against a jeep, watching the proceedings. He looks older now, the lines on his face deeper. The war is over for him too. He is likely just waiting to be discharged, to go back to his family's ranch, and try to forget the things he has seen. Their eyes meet across the dusty expanse. He doesn't smile. She doesn't either. No words are exchanged. None are needed. In that brief, silent gaze, the memory of that first day is present. The heat, the fear, the humiliation of the chains, and the sharp, liberating sound of severed steel. It was an act that cost him little and gave them something immeasurable. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. It was not an offer of peace. It was simply an affirmation of their humanity at a moment when they had forgotten it themselves. He gives her a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Annalise nods back. Then she turns and climbs the steps into a train car. As the train begins to move, pulling away from Camp Maxia and the endless Texas plains, she does not look back at the receding barbed wire.
She looks forward, through the window, at the unfamiliar American landscape rushing by. She is heading home, to a home that no longer exists, to a future she cannot imagine. The physical chains have been gone for months, but in her mind she will forever carry not their weight, but the echo of their breaking.